Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. 19 children and 2 teachers were shot dead in an elementary school in Texas in the city of Uvalde on Tuesday. The attack on the Robb Elementary School was carried out by an 18-year-old who attended Uvalde High School. Families have begun sharing the names of some of the victims. They include 9-year-old Uzziah Garcia, 10-year-old Amerie Jo Garza, 10-year-old Jose Flores, 10-year-old Xavier Lopez, 10-year-old Anabel Guadalupe Rodriguez, and 2 4th-grade teachers, Eva Morelos and Irma Garcia. Robb Elementary School is a school with about 600 students in just 3 grades, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The school's about 90% Latinx. Thursday was scheduled to be the last day of class for the year. The school district superintendent, Hal Harrell, spoke Tuesday.
My heart was broken today. We're a small community, and we'll need your prayers to get us through this.
The gunman has been identified as Salvador Ramos. He reportedly bought at least one of his guns on his 18th birthday a few days ago. He was shot dead in the school. Earlier in the day, he shot and critically wounded his grandmother. Tuesday's attack was the deadliest school shooting since the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, when a 20-year-old gunman shot dead 26 people, including 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7 in 2012. On Tuesday night, President Biden addressed the nation.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done?
The shooting in Uvalde came just 10 days after an 18-year-old self-described white supremacist attacked a grocery store in the heart of Buffalo's African-American community. He shot dead 10 people, all of whom were black. On Tuesday, a funeral was held for 65-year-old Celestine Chaney. Today, the Senate will hold a confirmation hearing for Stephen Dettelbach to head the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The agency has been without a permanent leader for 7 years. In the past, Dettelbach has supported a federal assault weapons ban and universal background checks. Voters went to the polls for primaries in Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas Tuesday. Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger both won their primaries, defeating challengers endorsed by Donald Trump. Governor Kemp, who defeated former Senator David Perdue, will face Democrat Stacey Abrams in November. She ran unopposed in the Democratic primary. In other closely watched Georgia races, former football star and Trump ally Herschel Walker won the Republican Senate primary. He'll face Senator Raphael Warnock in the general election. Far-right Republican Congressmember Marjorie Taylor Greene easily defeated 5 opponents in her primary. Another winner Tuesday was Democratic Congressmember Lucy McBath, who beat fellow Congressmember Carolyn Bourdeaux. The two had to face each other due to redistricting. McBath is a longtime gun control activist whose 17-year-old son, Jordan Davis, was shot dead by a white man in 2012 after a dispute over loud music at a gas station in Florida. In Texas, the race between Democratic Congressmember Henry Cuellar and progressive challenger Jessica Cisneros is too close to call. The Democratic establishment, as well as AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, lined up behind Cuellar, who's an anti-choice, pro-gun Democrat whose home was raided by the FBI in January in a corruption probe. Cisneros was endorsed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a supporter of Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and reproductive rights. President Biden's wrapped up his first trip to Asia as president, as tension remains high in the region. Earlier today, South Korea accused North Korea of test launching 3 ballistic missiles, including a possible intercontinental ballistic missile. It was the 17th missile test by North Korea this year. South Korea and the United States responded by launching their own land-to-land missile tests. Meanwhile, Japan has accused China and Russia of flying warplanes near its airspace Tuesday, while Japan was is hosting other leaders from the Quad, which includes the United States, Australia, and India. China said the flights were part of an annual military cooperation drill with Russia. China's accused the Quad of becoming an Indo-Pacific version of NATO. During its summit, the leaders of the Quad agreed to launch a new maritime surveillance system in the region. The war in Ukraine is now in its 91st day. Russia is facing growing calls to end its blockade of Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea that's preventing Ukraine from exporting grain. David Beasley of the UN World Food Programme condemned the blockade.
Well, to keep the ports closed as the harvest season is now coming in Ukraine in July and August, it means a declaration of war on global food security. If you can't get the food out the fields, I mean, Ukraine grows enough food to feed 400 million people. In a time on planet Earth where we're facing extraordinary food crisis before Ukraine, fuel costs, commodity prices, shipping costs were already doubling, tripling, quadrupling.
Earlier today, a top Russian official said Moscow would consider allowing for ships carrying food to leave Ukraine, but only if the West agreed to lift some of its sanctions on Russia. Separate investigations by the Associated Press and CNN have both concluded that it was Israeli forces who shot dead the Palestinian-American Al Jazeera correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh 2 weeks ago in the occupied West Bank. Abu Akleh was one of the best-known TV journalists in the Middle East. CNN reports it's obtained evidence suggesting Abu Akleh was killed in a targeted attack by Israeli forces. CNN reports, quote, there was no active combat nor any Palestinian militants near Abu Akleh in the moments leading up to her death, unquote. The Israeli military has responded saying that, quote, the claim that the shooting was intentional has no basis, they said. United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet is on a 6-day trip to China. Her visit will include time in the Xinjiang region, where China's been accused of the mass imprisonment and torture of Uyghurs and other Muslims. On Tuesday, a coalition of news outlets published a series of articles based on internal Chinese police documents obtained by hackers. The trove of documents include thousands of photographs of detained Uyghurs, as well as details about a shoot-to-kill policy targeting anyone who tried to leave the detention camps. In news from Nigeria, at least 50 people, including many farmers, have been killed in an attack in Borno State by the militant group Boko Haram. One survivor said the militants arrived on motorcycles armed with guns and machetes. Roughly 40 climate activists disrupted Shell's annual shareholder meeting Tuesday in London. 3 protesters were arrested, and Shell was forced to temporarily suspend the event. Climate activist Lauren MacDonald spoke outside the meeting.
Whilst millions of people have just been placed into fuel poverty in the UK, Shell has just announced a record £7 billion in profit for Q1 this year. This is completely outrageous, and we need a windfall tax now. We need the UK government to impose a windfall tax on these obscene profits whilst millions are struggling, and we need that money to be redistributed to the people that need it the most.
The FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force has arrested an Iraqi man living in Ohio for aiding and abetting a plot to assassinate former President George W. Bush. Authorities say the man, Shahab Ahmed Shahab, told an FBI informant in November that he wanted to target Bush because he was, quote, responsible for killing many Iraqis and breaking apart the entire country of Iraq, unquote. Authorities say Bush's life was never at risk. 2 undercover informants played key roles in the alleged plot by providing Shahab with cell phones and cell phone data cards, and by helping him devise a plan that never materialized to smuggle members of ISIS into the United States to assist him. In Indiana, trans girls will no longer be allowed to compete in girls' school sports after Republican lawmakers overrode a veto by Indiana's Republican governor. Indiana is one of 35 states that have passed or proposed anti-trans legislation this year alone. Meanwhile, GLAAD has condemned a new Netflix special by comedian Ricky Gervais for including what the group called, quote, dangerous anti-trans rants masquerading as jokes. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.